Hey, hey, hey.
Hey, there we are.
Michael, I guess you didn't read the YouTube comments. There was a campaign last week for you to get a haircut. Did you
Oh, it
not?
was, it was about my beard. Yeah,
Oh, and a hair. Sorry. Well, it's actually both.
yeah. Oh, really?
It's actually, I believe it's a 2 week long campaign. The first,
Uh-huh.
the first phase of the campaign focused, I believe, on the haircut, and now they're in the second phase,
Hmm.
and this is where they're really focused on the facial hair. So, I
Well,
mean, I leave it to you.
the thing is, all their moms told me that they really loved it, so it
Oh,
was hard
snap!
to.
They'll never recover from that.
Yeah.
I like it though. It's funny because the moms didn't say anything about my beard. It was
Hmm.
odd. I think it's because I keep it nicely trimmed. See that? You'll get even fewer complaints from the moms if you do that, brother. Just a little advice. So listen, man. 3 straight weeks of the show gaining audience, and it looks like we have a pretty serious audience now across a few platforms. And here's I have to warn you. This is it, right? This is the moment. Like from here on out, we're gonna be targets. This is about the place where you start to become a target, like, and people start to care what you say.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I found that with Unregistered. For quite a while, I was just my guests and I were just talking about the craziest stuff, and I never really worried about it because nothing ever happened. And then all of a sudden, I got just a little. I just crossed that threshold into being too big for your own good, and I'm just saying, people are going to come for us.
Hmm.
The interesting thing is it'll be the left, I think, this time, right? For the most part.
Well, I don't know the new left we've been courting, or you think? I don't know.
I mean, given our regular segment feature on the inferiority of black people, I would think they might. I mean, we spend like half an hour every show just being complete racists. So it's just a matter of time before the Southern Poverty Law Center puts us on the list.
Hmm.
I have good friends who are on the SPLC list who are like this. Michael Bolton, shout out to you, man. Like the nicest guy you'll ever meet. He's like the head of the 10th Amendment Center.
Oh, yeah, he's great. Yeah.
Michael's the nicest guy in the whole world, and he's on their list as basically a white nationalist terrorist.
For the 10th Amendment Center, for
Yeah,
like
Michael
he does
Bolton
really good
himself.
work. He does
Yeah,
anti-racist work too at the 10th Amendment Center.
he's totally anti-racist, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, no, Michael comes from the left too, so he has that kind of sensibility. And no, it's just that's just one example of many egregious. I mean, Tom Woods is on the list too, and I mean, Tom's not as like crunchy feely as Michael is, but he's absolutely a non-racist person as a thinker. I have no idea what Tom thinks in his head, but I do know that his public statements are absolutely non-racist. I didn't say anti-racist. That's a very different thing. I really prefer non-racists, don't you?
I prefer racists.
That's what I meant to say. Yes, exactly. You know where you stand with racists, and I actually mean this.
Yeah.
I really do. I don't understand why we try to shut them down. We should be encouraging them to speak more, especially if you are like their target race. Don't you want to know who hates you?
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's amazing, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
But
anyway,
I'm not racist. Some of my best friends are white.
So yeah, man, the pitchforks are coming.
Mm-hmm.
Any day. Just beware.
I think the SPLC has been declawed a little bit because Gavin McInnes has been suing them quite a bit. I think he's been draining them a little bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
winning?
He hasn't been winning, but it's been getting expensive for
They've
both
had to pay.
sides.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. Godspeed, Gavin. I hope it doesn't bankrupt you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, the pitchforks from the left, I think, are going to come because of our just relentless racism. But today we're going to try to balance that out by having someone on, special guest, to critique every right winger's favorite movie this year, The Sound of Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
They're all talking about it. They are raising money to pay for other people's tickets so that poor people can go see it for free. lots of prominent right-wingers are tweeting about it and insisting that you go. And to many people, this is a very common refrain, is that if you don't go see it, or if you don't say anything about it, you're a pedophile, which is logically sound. And I appreciate the diligence there. But that's what's going on there in the right wing this last week. This is what's on their mind, is this movie and the international satanic pedophile cabal that runs the world. Do you think, we talked about this, didn't we? Do you think the Democrats are more prone to pedophilia than Republicans?
Not in terms of practice, not in terms of like actual number of incidents that happen. No. Okay.
But in terms of what is it? Frequency of disposition?
Yeah, in terms of a disposition that is okay with children engaging in sexual acts and finding a problem with adult child sex relationships. Yeah,
that's of course. Yeah, I mean that's. I think most liberals and leftists would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think. But anyway, so yeah, The Sound of Freedom is all the rage. It actually did better at the box office the first week than the Indiana Jones movie, and I believe it was the #1 show in the land. And so yeah, everyone's talking about it, and there's a whole lot of shaming attached to it. And Owen Benjamin, your guy,
he's my guy.
Yeah, no, I've spent quite a bit of time with your guy this past week because of this. Well, I started there, and then I got sucked into just watching his live streams and just seeing what this is all about. I mean, I've known about him for years, of course, but I never really looked at what he did. So Owen's pissed because Owen, did you see his description of his hometown? Were you there for that?
Oswego, New York.
Yeah, amazing. He did this whole thing on his live stream on growing up in Oswego, New York, and painting a portrait of that town that just makes you want to slit both wrists. But anyway, in which, according to Owen, there were 9 priests in the town, in that diocese, and all 9 of them were accused of. By the way, pedophilia is, people don't understand. People misuse that term all the time. That's attraction to prepubescent children. Pederasty is sex. The act of sex with prepubescent children. Hebophilia, which...
Sorry.
Huh?
Do you know the joke about this?
What?
Oh, there are these distinctions between definitions, but it's really hard to communicate them clearly because explaining them makes you sound like a pedophile.
Oh, geez. Awesome.
Yeah.
Hebophile or hebophile is like almost everyone has it. It's sexual attraction to post-pubescent teenagers. Like that's, how many teenagers are in porn. I mean, we know. So, yeah, so that's, and of course the vast majority of the people who are sort of designated as pedophiles, are hebophiles. The number of actual pedophiles, or pederasts, I should say, people who actually act on a desire for sex with prepubescent children is quite small. So the problem is that all the hebophiles get lumped in with that. So anyway,
well, you're talking about the pitchforks coming after us,
right?
Both the left and the right are unable of making that distinction. Especially like the Gen Z, they call them Puritans, where they see.
Oh no.
Yeah. Anybody. Right. Yeah. Anybody like, like there's a bunch of TikToks like of people getting harassed at the gym, quote unquote. And the girl will say, myself, a literal 22-year-old child. Like how, right. 20-year-olds are infantilizing themselves and seeing themselves as victims that can't be sexualized.
So, the average Gen Zer would have been about 12 years old when the sex assault hysteria on college campuses broke out in 2012. That's when it started. And so I'm thinking that 12 is about when you become somewhat politically conscious, right? That's the sort of the first time you kind of have any real thoughts about politics. So I think those kids grew up under that, and if they're from middle class white families, and They come from highly educated families. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with money in the bank. It also has all to do with which colleges you went to. Yeah, families that have those colleges in their background, I'm sure it's a 95% production rate of children who think that way. So
that was the biggest irony of the college rape hysteria, in that, like, it's more dangerous than a war zone to send your daughter to college, but we have to send our daughters to college.
But there's great news. It's gone. It went away because they stopped talking about it years ago. It's like no one's talked about it. I don't think there's been one mention of it in the press this whole last academic year, after 2 straight years of being told every single day that 1 out of 3 or 4 college girls are raped, and on. And like one ridiculous story after another was debunked, like most famously the Rolling Stone cover story on this alleged gang rape at UVA, in which this woman was violently, brutally gang raped. It all turned out to be false. She recanted the whole thing. But and so they just stopped, and then they moved on. The next year after that was 2014, and you know what happened on campuses then, 14 and 15, was, oh my God, the Ku Klux Klan's on campus, and everybody was marching and going crazy and storming buildings and saying they were dying and their bodies were being broken by police and all that stuff. But yeah, so they just forgot. Now, apparently, they're just all these men on the campus have stopped raping women, which is awesome news. Just totally. That's so good. I mean, in other words, the movement worked, man. That movement convinced an entire generation of young men, including my son, which I'm so proud to say, who, just convinced them to stop raping women. Well done. Well done. Anyway, so yeah, we're going to have Caitlin Bailey on to talk about not raping women. Well, maybe, yes, we are, as a matter of fact, to talk about the Sound of Freedom. And Caitlin is the head of the Old Pros organization, which is fairly new, but already quite influential. It's one of the top sex worker advocacy groups. There's quite a few of those, believe it or not. And SWAP was kind of the biggest one before, but Old Pros has kind of burst onto the scene, and Caitlin's been doing a lot of media. And so she's going to come on and talk about whether there are problems with the Sound of Freedom. To what extent are there problems with it? Is it good at all? Is it wonderful? Is it hellacious? I mean, I don't know, but we're going to find out from her in the last half hour of the show.
And the rabbit hole goes deep on this one.
Oh my God. Super deep. And the problem is a lot of the stuff was conducted in third world countries, where there's just very little record keeping, and a lot of it was done in secret. And so we'll probably never know. We'll probably never get to the bottom of what Operation Underground Railroad has really done. There is some evidence, but we do know about their discourse, about how they talk about the issue of sex trafficking. And that is where they are definitely problematic, to use a left-wing term. But yeah, Caitlin will bring the heat on that. And we'll talk about some other issues about sex work that are relevant to everybody, like increased surveillance of sex workers, the techniques, the technology that's been used, that was pioneered for sex workers. Cops pioneered these new surveillance technologies where they have like basically machines sitting on the street. You can't see them, they're camouflaged, but they're recording everything that goes by all day long, stuff like that. They're now being used against everybody. So there's a lot going on with the sex worker world that is directly relevant, even if you've never even considered purchasing sex work or being a sex worker. It all ties in. Whores have always been pioneers in a lot of ways. Interestingly, the internet was basically invented by prostitutes, meaning that, and there's been some good articles on this in Wired, prostitutes, they pioneered a lot of like the e-commerce and sort of various forms of encrypted sort of communication, I think, on the web. They were the first people to do it at all.
Well, every little level of the internet, like we're on a streaming video platform right now. Like that was pioneered by cam girls, right? Like the way that we're asking people for super chats right now, that was pioneered by cam girls.
Oh,
like,
right.
Yeah.
Boom. Boom. Yes. It's incredible. Yeah. And they get no credit. It's quite annoying. Really amazing. all the sex workers I've known have been what feminists would all call sort of badass women, what conservatives would call, self-made women, women who they're entrepreneurs. Yeah, libertarians would call them entrepreneurs. They should be loved by everyone. I mean, they form businesses, the ones that are successful. They have a business, and you know what? Fundamentally, their business is not different than mine. I mean, I'm essentially selling time, like with my with the part of my body up here, but like it's the same thing, and it requires a ton of work. So you'll find them to be really intelligent and entrepreneurial and tough-minded, and really the nice thing about people who think of women as eternal ditzes, and of course a lot of women are eternal ditzes. You talk to like a career successful sex worker, man, there is no sentimentality in their minds for reasons you might imagine. And they see the world very, very clearly, never through rose-colored glasses. So that's why it's always good to hang out with them. So Caitlin will join us in 45 minutes. So let's talk about other stuff before she gets here. Mm-hmm. So what do you want to start with? We've got foreign affairs. We've got domestic affairs.
Well, the NATO summit just happened, and yesterday Zelensky did the fine motion of finally thanking us for all the money.
Give me money.
Yeah. Well, he said thank you this time, so I'll play that clip real quick. It was nice to hear him finally say thanks.
Mm-hmm. And you gave us huge support. I want to thank to all Americans. We understand that it's more than 43 billions for today. It's big support, and I understand that it's all your money, but you have to know that you spend this money for not just for fighting. You spend this money for our lives, and I think that we save the lives for Europe and for all the world.
Okay, so we probably should have led with this, because here's how momentous this.
Well, here's the real prostitute right here.
Well, yeah, no. So no, it's really people are sort of calling it like a disastrous meeting, a catastrophe, and it is for one person for sure, and that's that guy, Zelensky. In fact, this meeting is tantamount to a death sentence for him, because this means the war is now going to end naturally, meaning it will now end without some external power propping up one side or the other anymore. So the West basically during this meeting told Zelensky, we're done with you. The counteroffensive is a complete failure. We dumped most of our militaries into that. The British do not have a sufficient tank force anymore to fight at all on land, and because they gave all their tanks to the Ukrainians. Same with the Germans, gave all their Leopard tanks. So if you want to get together a militia, you won't even need an army. Get together a militia and take over Great Britain or Germany. Now's the time. They cannot defend themselves. So yeah, NATO finally have said, we're done. And Zelensky was pissed off, and he actually reprimanded them. That was before he thanked them, and got into a little verbal sparring match with the British defense minister, I think he is. And the defense minister said, Ben Hodges, I think his name is, said that Zelensky should be grateful, I think. And Zelensky, of course, bristled at that and shot back at him. And so there was like open fighting, I mean, among NATO and Zelensky. So everyone knows in the world that Ukraine certainly cannot win without NATO support. There's no NATO freakazoid who would even claim that. The most pro-Ukrainian people know that if and when NATO pulls their support, it's over. It's just a matter of how long it'll take. So the war is over. I mean, now it's just they have to decide how long they're going to need to take to sort of complete it. But the war is effectively over. And here's the thing with Zelensky. There's a powerful rumor. It's not been proven, but that he has consistently, since before the war, been under an ultimatum from the hard right nationalists, the actual Nazis in Ukrainian politics. They're about 20% of the population in terms of voters. About 20% vote for the hard right, pro-Nazi, because they're descended from the Banderites from World War II. And they just straight up Nazis. So anyway, that Zelensky, since the beginning, since before the war, have been under threat, under an ultimatum from that faction that they will kill him if he does not pursue the war to the last man. And that has explained why Zelensky has been so belligerent only since basically the day the war started, since the invasion. The day people might forget, it was an amazing thing. Like just before the war, Biden or somebody, I think, said something about how the Russians were about to attack, and the whole world was like, no, no, no. And Zelensky got on camera standing in the streets of Ukraine, kind of being a jolly guy. And the anti-war left liked him for that moment because he was like reprimanding Biden for being too paranoid and saying, no, the Russians aren't going to invade. No, it's cool. We're all good. Biden, leave us alone. He really kind of scolded Biden. That's why they don't like each other, by the way. I mean, they don't. So the next, as soon as they invade, though, he's like, oh, no, we got to go kill everybody and get money. All, F-16s go all the way, nuclear war. I mean, he's been gung-ho like maniac, but only since then. And I think some people think that's because the hard right, and they should just be called the fascist right. More specifically, they're really Nazis. They're descended from that particular branch of fascism. The Nazi right in Ukraine. Will we get a strike from YouTube for that word? I've heard that. The guys on Duran, they always spell it out, and I wonder if that's because even if you just utter the word, you'll get a strike from YouTube. I don't know.
Yeah, potentially. The way they do things, like they have it segmented out, that might be like too controversial and too hate.
Yeah. Well,
loaded.
Yeah. So I mean, everyone really knows about that 20%.
Oh, real quick on that.
Yeah.
I think I've seen some World War II videos on YouTube, and they always call them Germans. Like,
what do you mean? Like
historical videos about World War II.
Yeah.
They never use the N-word. They always call them Germans.
Oh, well, that's better. I mean, because 95% of Germans were not Nazis. So if you see a German, don't call him a Nazi from World War II. Anyway, so yeah.
Oh, and Tim Pool doesn't use it either.
Really?
Like he deliberately calls them, like he calls modern politicians World War II German authoritarians when he wants to call them that.
Okay, so why? Yeah, but so why? What's the self-censorship about? Why?
Oh, I think it's because the YouTube algorithm.
Okay.
The robot hears the N-word and it's
what I feared.
Yeah.
What I feared. Oh, I just used it how many times?
Yeah.
Great. Here we go. I mean, you can't use that word. Mm-hmm. Like, how can we teach? Okay. Okay. Like what? Mm-hmm. I need someone to explain that one.
Well,
I mean, it's the bad guys. Why can't you talk about the bad guys?
Well, like it's computer algorithms that are doing the censorship. So like back in the day, a lot of chess videos got taken down because it's like black attacks white, white attacks black, black out, it's this violent language. And so the computer thinks that something's happening.
That we might be the NAZI people. Okay. And therefore they would take it down. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we know about what that little faction of Ukrainian politics and the military looks like. Everyone has a sense of Azov. We know about those guys. So, certainly very capable of doing something like, listen to this, threatening the life of not just the president of Ukraine, the Jewish president of Ukraine. Would they have a problem pulling the trigger on Zelensky? No. They wear swastikas. We know how they would feel about killing yet another Jew who's just doing their bidding. And they know that. The funniest thing about this whole war, but yet it's so not funny, is that the basic flow of power goes like this. I mean, the Nazi fringe of Ukrainian politics, it's not the mainstream, but it's a fringe that's managed to gain control by various means. It's that fringe, the Azov Nazi fringe of Ukrainian politics, controls Zelensky, And Zelensky has been basically controlling like the West. So what's happening, and including like George Soros, who's one of the biggest funders of the whole movement against Russia in Eastern Europe, right? So what you have is actual Nazis basically pushing around, doing the work of George Soros. I mean, they're doing what George Soros wants done, is actual Nazis in the field in Eastern Europe right now, fighting and dying. Nazis are fighting and dying for George Soros's project right now. So the whole thing's pretty weird. But I do think it's plausible. Again, we'll never probably be able to prove that Zelensky has that over his head. But, even if he doesn't, even if they never did make an explicit threat, if you were the president of Ukraine in this situation, knowing how gung-ho those guys are about this war and what they are, would you be nervous about such a thing? And given, the incredible corruption of Ukrainian politics and just an ultra-violent society in general right now, where assassinations are no big deal. There have been several Ukrainian top cabinet members have gotten taken out. Like, they've had their goddamn helicopters shot out of the air. I mean, like, his top cabinet members, people don't even know about this stuff. So it's just an extremely violent situation in general. So I think it's totally plausible that the Nazis in Ukraine have basically forced Zelensky to pursue this war, and that they really hold all the power, and that the United States needs that Nazi fringe to get what it wants. I mean, that's where we are. Mm-hmm. That's where we are. We are funding, because the pro-Ukrainian person will say, "Oh no, it's only like whatever percent." I'd be like, "Yeah, I know. It's about 20%." Not most Ukrainians are Nazis. I'm not saying that. I, by the way, am descended from Ukrainian Jews, so I can say whatever the fuck. Anyway, no, but it's that they happen to maneuver themselves into a position, in a very strategic position, in which they are needed to pursue this war, because they're all ready to fight. Most ordinary Ukrainians were not ready to fight. That's why they had to institute conscription. They had to start enslaving men, and we've seen them hauling men off the streets and throwing them in trucks and sending them to the front. We've seen many videos of that. We know they do it. My God, I saw this video yesterday in the trenches, the Ukrainian trenches. The guy had his iPhone on, and it was taking video, and it was like in his body armor like this, so it was taking the video as a mortar shell dropped right next to him, exploded. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
And it was horrendous. And the guy next to him, the soldier next to him in the trench with his gun, had a gray beard. The dude is my age, like in his 50s. This is like macabre shit. I mean, this is next level, grotesque, cynical warfare. So anyway, the war's over though. Hallelujah. I mean, I do think that's what happened here. People are misreporting it. I think they're misinterpreting it. I think it really is an announcement of the end of the war.
Did you read Michael Tracy's piece in Newsweek? His opinion piece?
No, what did he say?
He basically said that all this deliberation about whether or not Ukraine should join NATO is useless, that Ukraine has pretty much de facto already joined NATO, and that the summit proved that they're still wanting to widen the war efforts. The Biden administration is sending cluster bombs to be used there. So he's a little bit more cynical, and he's ever the contrarian here.
Yeah, you want to talk about cynical. This thing, we gave them so much of our own ammunition to fight this war that we ran out of the regular ammunition, the legal ammunition, and essentially, and are sending them these things that leave basically landmines scattered all around until a child picks one up accidentally. I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're currently sending to Ukraine. I mean, it's beyond cynical. I mean, so like, what's the upshot of Tracy's argument though? What is he saying here is the dynamic that's going on?
That basically Ukraine doesn't need to formally join NATO in order to get all the benefits.
Oh, right. Quasi NATO. Well, they're going to lose territory. I mean, that's also what happened today or this week with the NATO summit. I think effectively NATO announced that, guess what? That 20% that Russia seized and currently holds most of the Donbass, the east and the south, Crimea, is theirs now. I don't I don't see any other conclusion to draw from this meeting. He was completely rejected in so many ways. And I just think this is it. I think there's going to be a negotiated settlement in a matter of months in which Russia gets to keep what it currently holds, that portion of Ukraine. In exchange, Ukraine they can't get into NATO, so it doesn't matter about that anymore. They will probably get, I know what it is, they're going to get admission into the EU. And that's how they'll settle. The problem is that won't end the conflict. That just sort of kicks the can down the road. But that's my prediction for what happens. The war ends, Ukraine gets admission into the EU, and Russia gets to keep the Donbass and Crimea. But the conflict continues. So, I mean, because there's still so many people inside Ukraine, like these Azov Nazis, whose entire life's mission is to kill Russians and to destroy Russia. So they're gonna still want to go to war. And NATO, of course, the freaks among the neocons. And by the way, the neocons course has been awesome. We did 3.5 hours the first night. Told all sorts of stories about the neocons, but that neocon generation, that latest neocon generation led by Victoria Nuland in the State Department, their life's mission too is to destroy Russia and unseat Vladimir Putin and replace him with a government that is amenable to the United States. So they're not going to stop. But I'll take it for now. I mean, the kind of negotiated settlement I just described, because I don't see a fundamental resolution of that conflict happening anytime soon. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's until neocons have been driven out of Washington and out of London too. They're also very powerful in the UK, and the United States actually gets a lot of its direction from the UK on this stuff. And the UK has just been even more fanatical, pro-Ukrainians, anti-Russian. So we have to expose that little clatch. I won't call it a cabal, a clatch of intellectuals, professors, that's what they are, who managed to gain control of the foreign policy apparatus and have been basically running U.S. foreign policy with, thank God, some hindrance from Congress. But in general, they've been able to do what they want to do. And they've reshaped the whole 21st century. And this is their war. This whole war would not have happened without the neocons. And they also always have allies, who are liberals and conservatives. They often have allies who are very important, like Dick Cheney. So, sorry.
That LaCroix's hitting pretty hard, isn't it?
What's that?
That LaCroix's hitting pretty hard.
I gotta say, damn. Apricot, the best. Mm-hmm. Damn. I should have put vodka in there. Neocons bad. You talk for a while. What's next? Let's see a video.
Neocons bad. Yeah. Well,
no, we've got to expose them. And that's why we do this on shows like this. Mm-hmm. And we've got to spread the word, and we've got to get rid of them. I mean, they are whenever you expose ordinary Americans to the neocons, no one likes them. No one likes them. They don't think like anybody else in this country. They don't think like your neighbor does. They don't think like your grandfather does. They are absolute freaks. And the problem is they have all the power in the world. So we got to just keep talking about it. Victoria Nuland should be on everyone's lips.
Yeah.
No, okay, don't forget that.
Yeah.
Everyone should be talking about Victoria Nuland. I don't want to suggest anything sexual with that woman.
Okay. You were talking about the Prigozhin revolution earlier, and how you suspected FBI involvement in it. And Michael Tracy on Substack was writing that Chris Wray sort of made some admissions when he was speaking at Texas A&M, saying that he knew that there are a lot of, quote, there are a lot of Russians, including Russian intelligence service folks, who aren't too happy. And then in private, I believe he said, unhappy Russian intelligence officers is an important opportunity for us to recruit some people. We want those unhappy Russians to know we'd love to talk to them, and they could maybe have a role in changing the course of history.
That's Chris Wray, FBI.
That's Chris Wray at Texas A&M. FBI requested that no audio be recorded, but that was a Texas A&M staffer talking about what Chris Wray said when he visited in April.
Whoa. Yep. I mean, it's not necessarily conclusive proof.
No, it's not proof necessarily.
But it does sound like he was ready for this thing to happen. Like they were prepared, you know? They kind of had this whole program set up, you know, as soon as it happened. Like, hey, come on over. We got a thing for you. We're ready for you guys. We'll welcome you in. They were all ready for that. So they might have known about it in advance, at least. So it seems like to me. But I think Prigozhin got something from the U.S. I don't get it. What's the motivation otherwise? I think there was a deal brokered with Putin and Prigozhin that the CIA basically brokered. And they gave him something. I mean, I don't know what they would give him, except for like a security guarantee, which would be nice. You know, I mean, that's not a bad. Listen, what I said about the violence in Ukraine, the political violence in Ukraine right now, which is off the charts. If I were Prigozhin, you know, you would know that there are going to be a lot of people everywhere, including inside Ukraine, who are going to want to kill you. Just so many people. I mean, I bet there are members and former members of Wagner who want to kill him. You know, I mean, this guy runs a mercenary army. There are people who want to kill him from all over. And Africa, there are people who want to kill him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he got some kind of security guarantee from the U.S., like that there will be some detachment protecting him and his family, maybe just in perpetuity. That's what if I were him, that's what I would have done. And I would have been like, and I'm gonna like launch this fake protest against the government, but we'll abandon it immediately, which is what they did. Anyway, yeah, Tracy's onto something.
Well, our favorite congressperson, Matt Gaetz, was grilling Christopher Wray just yesterday.
It's my boy
on the House floor, and he was grilling him on the Biden corruption, and this was the clip that sort of went viral, and it even landed on Hannity, and Hannity was like, "Oh, snap!" So even Republicans are finally flipping on the FBI here.
I'm sitting here with my father. I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows and my ability to forever hold a grudge, that you will regret not following my direction. I am sitting here waiting for the call with my father. Sounds like a shakedown, doesn't it, Director?
I'm not going to get into commenting on that.
You seem deeply uncurious about it, don't you? Almost suspiciously uncurious. Are you protecting the Bidens?
Absolutely not. The FBI does not and has no interest in
you won't answer the question about whether or not that's a shakedown, and everybody knows why you won't answer it. Because to the millions of people who will see this, they know it is. And your inability to acknowledge that is deeply revealing about you.
Yeah, I watched a lot of it today. What's your take?
Well, I mean, there's the obvious take, and there's Glenn Greenwald's take too, which is the Democrats were pissed off the whole time that the FBI is being questioned at all. And the only people asking substantive questions were MAGA Republicans like Matt Gaetz. Did you see what Glenn Greenwald was talking about with the FBI working with Ukrainian intelligence to censor social media posts?
Yep.
That was a big report that came out of the House Judiciary Committee. Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, I think we got censored actually for that. We got censored for something about Ukraine once. There was I think there was one Ukraine flag or something. Could be wrong about that, but I know other people have. I feel like we didn't we get one strike or something?
I think we've been safe on Ukraine. I think we have.
Have we?
Yeah.
Okay. But other people I know have gotten hit. And it's shocking. It's totally shocking that they would censor foreign policy speech. I mean, my God. So yeah. But what do you make of the sort of what did you think of Ray? Do you
well, yeah, it is all theater, and I wouldn't expect him to answer any other way necessarily.
No, there's some real power play here. That's not just I mean, people's careers are on the line. I mean,
they are.
No,
yeah.
It's not. It's real.
Like, what do you expect Christopher Wray to say? You know what, Matt Gaetz, you're right. That does sound like Hunter Biden was being very aggressive, and we should look into the Bidens right now. Like,
yeah. I mean, right. First of all, the line of questioning was often very stupid. Just as prosecutors, they really fucked up, especially that idiot MAGA woman from Wyoming who beat Liz Cheney.
Yeah, all these people supposedly came out of law school, and they're not doing anything to prove a point. They're just it's like a Facebook post. They're like, here's my rant. Now respond and confirm what I said or deny it.
Yeah, the best moments in congressional hearings is cross-examination, basically. When they do that sort of cross-exam style with the witness. And that's what never. I mean, they tried it, but they just were ham-handed about it. So they always gave him an easy out. But I got the sense he was somewhat believable, and partly because he claimed often not to have an intimate knowledge of the cases at hand. And I actually kind of believed him. When you're the head of an agency that gigantic, you're working so much just keeping it going. Like you're consumed so much with just the day-to-day and the overall strategic plan. And you got to run the FBI. You can't focus. How much of your attention can you focus on one single case or even like 10 particular cases? I wouldn't be surprised if he really truly didn't know a lot of the stuff that was being said to him. Mm-hmm. I could be wrong, but it sort of came off that way.
Yeah. And I don't know, this happens a lot, but like you don't know enough to substantially comment on it. And if you did reveal what you'd be digging yourself a hole. So
I guess yeah. So the J6 stuff. I mean, so we now have even more evidence of the involvement of feds, the degree of involvement of feds. Tucker, this has not been substantiated, I don't think, but Tucker has the former chief of the Capitol Hill Police, according to Tucker, told him that something like, quote, yeah, a lot of federal agents were in January 6th. But I mean, we've seen so much evidence for that. And I mean, it has sounded to me at times to be like something like, a significant fraction of the crowd was actually federal agents of some sort, like maybe like a quarter or something like that even.
Well, there were the people who were on the front lines breaking into the Capitol had to all be feds or Fed adjacent or,
like Ray Epps.
Yeah.
He was at the front and then he retreated, but
he's the only person on video encouraging people to go into the Capitol and is now just got a puff piece by the New York Times because he's suing Tucker.
He's suing Fox, for defamation or whatever. And I'm just like, now I'm feeling gaslit. I just feel like, I mean, how on earth could that not have been a Fed right there, the way he acted? I mean, that's the only explanation for what he was doing. And yet they maintain down to their last breath that no, this is an unfair framing of a man. Of course, all the Democrats are now pro Ray Epps, even though he was admittedly MAGA, although maybe he was never MAGA. I would think he was never MAGA, actually.
They say he voted for Trump twice.
They say. Yeah, there's no way to prove that because guess what? Voting's anonymous. So he told them he can say whatever he wants. He can say he voted for Trump, and which would be very convenient. I bet he never did. I bet he was basically apolitical or something, and they just sort of found him to do this op. But we also know, and this is from Brandon Caserta, who was on Unregistered, one of my favorite episodes ever, who was one of the people who was rounded up in the sting in Michigan, which entrapped many men, I think like 7 guys or something like that, or 9 guys, in an alleged kidnapping plot against Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And Brandon was one, and the FBI one day came into his work and hauled him into a van, and he was in jail for 1.5 years until he was completely exonerated. But we know from that case, because this is now public record in Brandon's case, that the FBI had that something like 2/3 or 3/4 of the people who were involved in all the alleged kidnap plotting were FBI assets, were either agents or informants. So the whole thing was just created by the FBI just to entrap these guys who were members of a militia. Like Brandon had just joined this militia in Michigan that was involved in this stuff. So yeah. And of course there were a bunch of like really sad alcoholic guys who like lived in basements. And of course, they were right wing in ways that we know about. And of course, they said all kinds of stuff about Hillary Clinton and Gretchen Whitmer being C words. I'm sure I'm not going to say it for YouTube, but and that's what put them away. Those guys are now doing long sentences. There's two of them. Brandon, thank God, got off, and several of them did get off, but two guys are going to do hard time. I forget what it is, but more than 10 years each. So yeah, we know the FBI does this. We've had a lot of evidence, thank God, thanks to Julie Kelly and Darren Beatty, the only two journalists I know of who are doing this work. They've uncovered all kinds of stuff about the FBI involvement in J6. And, from what I've heard, I mean, my best guess is the number of FBI assets, both agents and informants in the crowd on January 6th will be in the hundreds. It'll be in multiple hundreds. I mean, that level, and how many people were there overall? Like 5,000 or 10,000, something like that.
The agent provocateur thing, for me, that was always a conspiracy theory that Alex Jones would talk about.
Oh, no.
And then I saw clips from the Ferguson riots in 2013 and 2014.
Yep.
Where I saw police officers take off black bloc protesting gear and make arrests on the spot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You saw this in person?
No, I saw this on Twitter.
Yeah.
I saw videos on Twitter of...
I've never saw that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a cop. It was an undercover cop, basically, obviously dressed to blend in with protesters, making an arrest on the street of somebody who was looting and rioting.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, we know this. This is 20 years ago. My ex-wife got sort of pushed accidentally onto the ground by this immigrant who was running to escape arrest, and she happened to be in his way, and she got pretty violently pushed on the ground. New York City, this is Manhattan, in the 1990s, during Giuliani's time. And when the police force had like tripled in 5 years or something like that. And it's before, like 1 second after she hit the ground, she said that like 5 people, there's a busy street in Manhattan in the middle of the day, just people rushing by all the time, right? She said like 5 people immediately emerged from the crowd and said, "Ma'am, NYPD, can I help you?" That they have that many undercover cops everywhere, just crawling around Manhattan, especially. You really can't get away with a crime in Manhattan. It's basically impossible. There's cameras and cops everywhere. But yes, they've been using agent. So nation states at all sizes and levels have been using agents provocateurs since the 19th century. It's a French term used by the devious French republics. I mean, it was a technique invented by the devious French republics of the 19th century. May go back further than that. Actually, I could be wrong about that. But anyway, it's a very old tradition among nation states. That's what my point is, that they've been doing this for a long time. We've known about it in other countries. We've known about it here. The FBI. I mean, if you read, if you take 10 minutes and read the history of the FBI, you're going to read about like the use of agent provocateurs for 100 years by the FBI in all sorts of operations. Most famously, the Black Panthers, right? I mean, they flooded the Black Panthers with informants and agents, working undercover. So, I mean, of course. And the entire deep state's been trying to oust Trump by any means necessary since before he took office. So of course they did this.
Yeah. I've met a couple people who were there that day, and this is why I want to be like specific about it. There were hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the streets there to see Trump speak. Mm-hmm. And there were only like a few hundred that actually got into the Capitol building. Mm-hmm. And so like, yeah, just the way that they paint this entire movement, like they use basically those 100 feds that were up front, that I'm just going to call them feds, who did everything that you saw on camera. And then the crazy homeless people like the Q shaman who was with them, to paint the millions of people in the streets like your grandma. Mm-hmm. as well as Trump himself and Alex Jones for inciting a quote unquote attempted coup on the Capitol.
Yep. Yeah, no, they're political prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were set up, they were entrapped, they were incited, and they were disproportionately punished, to say the least, and still are being disproportionately punished. Like Ashley Babbitt was disproportionately punished, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So they are political prisoners. There's no doubt about it, that they are in prison, not for what they did, but because of who they are, because of their politics. The problem is those guys in jail in Washington, D.C., the January 6th defendants, they are the world's most unpopular political prisoners. Like, no one cares about them, or actually most Americans are probably hostile to them. Certainly most Europeans are hostile to them. They really don't have a constituency, except for MAGA itself, that will ever come to their aid. So that's why they're still in prison. And that's why they're getting these incredibly long sentences, like 10, 20 years for that. I mean, this is one of the most grotesque miscarriages of justice since like the 1970s, since there was a lot of judicial reform like in the 80s and 90s. So there's just outrageous shit going on before then, even in the 80s too, like judges using their discretion to just put people in prison for life just for, because they had a personal grudge or something like that, or a political grudge. And that's what this looks like to me. This looks like the attempts to basically shame and silence political radicals in the 60s and 70s by throwing the book at them. That's a return of that. It's just that now they're sort of right wing instead of left wing,
Mm-hmm.
these poor victims. But yeah, they are just the most unpopular political prisoners. That's their problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just want to get the full narrative and picture. Like, they rigged the election, and then they use the popular dissent of that rigged election to pull off basically a sting operation on their political opposition.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can tie together a lot of things. I mean, the thing that Sam Husseini and I are working on is kind of putting all these stories of the last few years, the biggest stories in the world, together, because there are stunning connections between all the big stories, COVID and Ukraine, for instance, Hunter Biden and China and COVID and Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's an incredible, this network of people who are all sort of had something to do with each of these things in some way or another. But yeah, but on the domestic scene, and I don't know if any of this was like coordinated in a grand way, but it certainly is a conspiracy of sorts, or it's a web of different conspiracies. But yeah, they set them up and took them down, and now they've announced the message to all dissidents on the right: you'll be crushed, you'll be disappeared, essentially, if you come at us again. And I don't know. I mean, what's the sequence to you, and why is that significant?
Oh, the sequence of events
of the repression of MAGA.
Oh, I mean, it's basically, what I laid out in that. Well, there's the lockdown that happened, which created the conditions for basically an election not to happen at all. Like, campaigning doesn't happen. You can't organize and swing states. You can't have giant in-person attendances of rallies and stuff without being labeled "you're killing grandma." So the entire Republican strategy of Middle America is thrown out the window. So and then the giant excuses that they made in the media for, we can't have another debate, we can't have a second debate because it's too dangerous. People can't be in person. So all the framing of media was highly staged in this giant COVID theater. Like, people need to go back and watch television from that time, where like the town hall where Trump is on a stool like 20 feet away from this reporter just being grilled about QAnon, which I want to tie back into everything else. So also, people are isolated, so they don't have the time to talk to each other. Like, you know, an election happens in a bar room a lot of times. It happens over dinner where you talk to your family and you're like, hey, who are you voting for this year? That really didn't happen in 2020. And then the emergency rules that were changed state by state to favor emergency mail-in voting. So the rules were changed to fit the Democratic strategy. And then you could argue as to whether or not they cheated on election day itself. I think they did. I think everybody tries to cheat. Pretty much every election, it's politics, it's war. You should cheat if you actually want to win. Yeah. And then, the Stop the Steal movement happens. And all this time, the media tries to play down the Stop the Steal movement from November to January, which is documented really well in Alex Lee Moyer's film, Alex's War, as to how big Stop the Steal actually was. And then all this repression is flipped on its head when people gather in person for the first time in DC to voice themselves when they've been repressed from voicing themselves for a year. And then you get a bunch of FBI agents at the front of the phalanx who stormed the Capitol, and then it becomes a giant sting operation. And everybody's thrown in jail.
Someone needs to write a book, a comprehensive book on the repression of MAGA, the MAGA movement. It is, and this is mostly since 2020 in a sense. I mean, or, you know, it started with the election, I would say, of 2020 in earnest. Well, they didn't go after MAGA for 4 years. They just went after Trump.
They just tried to impeach Trump twice, and then they
and his associates, and they went after all his associates. And by the way, did you see Ted Lieu? That was amazing. He says, this is the showstopper line that MSNBC was all excited about. Ted Lieu during the hearings, he said, well, and he listed all of Trump's associates who have been convicted of a crime or something. And he goes through it all. And he says, well, I mean, don't blame the FBI that Trump is surrounded by criminals. I mean, as if to say, like, that justifies having, you know, a crowd full of FBI informants storm the Capitol.
Yeah.
Like,
well, we've got Caitlin Bailey now. She's awesome. She just joined the room.
Let's do it.
But yeah, I want to tie QAnon being an asset of the left and how that ties into this movie, but we'll have her in.
Yeah, we should. Caitlin Bailey.
Thanks for having me.
Hi.
So,
I would love to. First of all, this is Michael Weimer. We are the co-hosts of this show, and we have a live audience here. And I have been wanting to talk to you for a while now about a lot of things, but in particular, this movie, or more importantly, sort of the discourse around this movie called The Sound of Freedom, because I've seen there have been a couple of pieces written in the media criticizing it, which I think are sort of decent, sort of halfway attempts at doing that. But I think there's just a lot more to be said about kind of the discourse around this movie. But before we do that, I'd love for you to talk about yourself and Old Pros.
Sure.
And just do the pitch. You know, you've kind of emerged. I've been following the sex worker sort of rights scene for a long time, and I saw you sort of emerge recently, and it was really exciting because I think you're just a great new voice to have. So tell us what you do and what's going on.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. Sure. My name is Caitlin Bailey. I'm the founder and executive director of Old Pros. We're a nonprofit media organization trying to change the status of sex workers in society. And so we really combat this very old and very destructive false conflation between sex trafficking or human trafficking and consensual adult sex work, out of which so much bad policy has come for over 100 years or 6,000 years, depending on when you start counting. And so we do a lot of things. We produce the Oldest Profession podcast. We come and talk to folks like we're doing right now. And we try to educate legislators and constituents on why it's so important we think differently about the oldest profession, especially as we move into the surveillance and technology age that we're entering.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And you guys are for decriminalization, not what's called legalization. So do that real quick.
Sure. Yeah. Decriminalization is the only policy that reduces violence. We have to remove criminal penalties that, for people engaged in the sex trade, whether they are buying sexual services, selling sexual services, or facilitating sexual services. Any form of criminalization increases vulnerability and leads to more violence. And legalization is no exception. Legalization is sort of an effort to create a regulatory structure to contain and control sex workers. So the red light district in Amsterdam is one example. The brothels in Nevada are another. And, all you need to know about Nevada is that even though it's the only state with legal regulated prostitution, it has the highest arrest rate per capita for prostitution related offenses.
Why is that? I've heard you say that before.
Sure. Yeah. So the only way to work legally in a brothel in Nevada is first you have to register as a legal prostitute. This is something that becomes subpoenable about you for the rest of your life. You can imagine how this comes up in child custody cases. And I'm sure I don't have to tell your audience why it's so important or why people would be reluctant to put themselves on a stigmatized list. Once you overcome that hurdle, you have to work by not just the state and county, but also the house rules. We're talking about 12 or 24-hour shifts. We're talking about a lot of fees that have always been associated with brothels, but we're also talking about a legal system that is much more interested in containing sex workers and preventing their freedom of movement than it is in reducing violence or exploitation. If you are a legally registered sex worker working at a legally licensed brothel, you can't leave the brothel and go see a movie or go out to dinner or meet a friend for drinks. You have to stay on the premises. Otherwise, it's a violation of local law. So we're against regulatory structures.
I love it. So, I mean, basically, legalization means, in effect, an intertwining of the state or the legal regime with the industry.
Legalization creates state enforced monopolies, and the only group of folks that it benefits are the licensed brothel owners themselves.
Right.
This is not something that sex workers want. It's not something that clients want. It literally only helps brothel owners.
Right.
Yeah.
So you want the law to be largely uninvolved with sex work,
I mean,
right?
sex work is work, but it is also sex. And so I think it's important for all of your listeners, whether they've ever engaged in this work or not, to understand that any kind of legal apparatus that criminalizes some form of consensual adult sexual activity, whether it's paid or unpaid, creates an open door for the surveillance and kind of government intervention that reaches in and interferes with the most private part of our personal lives.
Yeah. Okay. Can we talk about you for a minute?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what do you say?
Yeah. I mean, I got into this work, very reluctantly. I was a stand-up comedian when Donald Trump signed SESTA FOSTA into law in 2018. I saw, a lot of the tools that my friends and peers were using to keep ourselves safe, to schedule and screen clients, to help trade information, especially harm reduction and safety information. All of that got wiped away. This is when Backpage was seized by the FBI. We lost Craigslist erotic services. And so I saw the devastating impact that this law had and was really disappointed by my, sort of free speech advocates in comedy who didn't recognize this as an existential threat to freedom of expression on the internet. But as we've seen, this, hysteria around so-called trafficking, or sort of an updated version of the white slave myth that has been with us for a long time, is being used to erode all of our liberties and especially our ability to move privately and securely online.
Okay. So let's talk about this movie.
Sure.
I've had a lot of strong feelings about it, but I want to hear just first, like, your feelings about it. When did you first hear about it, and what did you first just sort of think? Your the first blush. Just
it sort of flew into my consciousness a few weeks ago when I started to hear about the press campaign and the way that this was being marketed and sort of leveraging and mobilizing churches and other conservative groups sort of across the country to buy tickets. And I recognize this. I think our best case scenario is that this is our generation's Taken. It falls into a long line of self-aggrandizing films, right, trying to lionize single actors who are using violence to protect innocent people, which is a story that we're all very susceptible to. But, you know, Taken was very bad for sex workers and anti-trafficking advocates that are actually trying to reduce violence.
But Taken was fiction, real quick. Taken
Correct.
was fiction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's basically, you know, Taken is like The Searchers, is like Birth of a Nation, is like all of the dozens of films that were created and made popular during the white slave, you know, hysterical moment that we had during the progressive era when we were first making films. In fact, one of the first religiously funded films in this country was funded by the Reverend Paul Smith, who, very similar to what's happening now, raised money and produced a film lionizing his own efforts to combat white slavery by very helpfully shutting down the brothels that women lived and worked in. Yeah.
Well, that introduces race into this question, which I haven't thought about. Well, I had thought about it a little bit. I mean,
we haven't met our quota for this show.
That's right. We're a very racist show. I don't know if you know that, but I mean, I did notice that the movie, as far as I understand it, is about, yes, and I haven't seen it. I'm really mostly talking about the discourse around the movie. But as far as I understand it, the movie is about rescuing kids in the third world. That it's always third. So the bad guys, I believe, are always brown.
Always from not from around here, right?
Yeah.
Which is the most pernicious element of this myth. You know, nobody wants to support sexual violence against vulnerable people, right? Whether we're talking about children or poor folks. But the call is coming from inside the house. There's another great piece of media that is also making its way out there called Shiny Happy People that I think is a much more accurate depiction of what sexual violence within institutions, within families, within religious communities looks like. But we really want the enemy to be out there, right? Whether we're talking about immigrants, whenever there has been a trafficking or a white slavery panic in this country, it has been met immediately with legislation curtailing or limiting immigration, which is just not the source of sexual violence. And so this is something that people in the anti-trafficking world talk about all of the time. The harm behind this movie and the organization it depicts is, you know, in part the trauma that is done when you pay a bunch of dudes to LARP as like roided out, well-armed folks, you know, sort of descending onto people's lives so that they can have their hero moment that's not met with resources. So there's direct harm for the folks that are like in the literal line of fire. But then there's also a much more pernicious harm because you are repeating these myths that prevent victims from coming forward and prevent law enforcement and other folks in the field from being able to recognize the very real trafficking that is actually happening, not just in sex work, but across labor sectors. And so this pull and this obsession and this fetishization of this very old lie we've been telling about what sex trafficking looks like or what sexual exploitation looks like has caused way more problems. We haven't rescued a single sex slave by telling this very old and long debunked lie.
Okay. There's a lot here. Now, let me tell you something, Miss Caitlin Bailey. There are children out there being sold into slavery, and you are sitting here claiming it's all a fraud.
Sure.
I mean, hold on now. Let's be serious. Yeah. So, I mean, we know, don't we, that this does happen to some extent in the world, right? There are, I mean, I haven't seen the actual like primary sources, so I can't absolutely prove it, but I've seen lots and lots of sort of secondary evidence that there are children who are sold by their parents, basically, into prostitution when they are clearly minors and are forced to do that as children. And that, I don't know. I mean, is this not true?
No, it is true. And that does happen. But I think the important and also true part of that sentence is by their parents.
Yeah.
We've never had a single case in this country of a child being abducted by a stranger and taken somewhere else to engage in sexual exploitation, right? Whether that's because they're abducted by, And so people in those kinds of desperate situations are doing a bad thing. Some of them are selling their children into sexual slavery. Many of them are allowing their children to work at places like slaughterhouses or mines or in agriculture. There are so many different kinds of labor exploitation, and we really ought to be looking into all of it. But when we tell ourselves a story that the only kind of trafficking that matters is when somebody is paying somebody else for sex, not only do you end up demonizing the overwhelming majority of adult consensual sex workers that engage in that work, you know, on the spectrum, right, of choice or circumstance, right, like all work, but you also pull resources away from the very real and often violent exploitation that you see, again, in slaughterhouses or mines. And so this hyperfixation, it's a real problem.
Yeah. So I was sort of talking about the international aspect of this. So,
Sure.
So Elizabeth Nolan Brown and I have both independently, and then we sort of cross-checked it with each other, looked at basically every single alleged sex slave case of the last, I think, 10 years it was, and could not find a single one.
Correct.
That was true. That was slavery. What we found was prostitution. In a handful of cases, it was underage people.
Sure.
But the vast majority it was just straight prostitution. They were adults doing consensual sex work. And then I've done a lot of historical work on this. I don't know if you know, but like I've gone all the way back to the white slavery panic, and couldn't find anything. And I searched and searched and searched and searched and searched. I found one case that might have happened in the downtown New York City in the 19th century, that there might have been a noise heard from a basement that might have had some prostitutes in it. I mean, nothing, basically. There's been no evidence of sex slavery in this country. Now, Caitlin Bailey, that's not true for the rest of the world, though, is it? I mean, I was thinking about India, for instance. Whereas I understand it, there's a red light district there that has children in it right now. Like you can go walk in and there's children there that you can have sex with for money. So who were sold by the parents, I guess, presumably. But
well, there are also children in red light districts because there are mothers in red light districts. And so I think it's important, and, you know, to sort of resist this impulse to pretend that like sex workers are some subspecies of people that have to be ostracized or isolated for the good of society. Obviously, paying to have sex with children is wrong. Those deeply poor people, right, who are doing this work, are being coerced into this work, are doing so in a really awful system where there's all kinds of exploitation happening from all angles, right? And so the overwhelming majority of people that engage in this work are doing so to meet a need. And we're not going to meet that need by sending a SWAT team in to kill the bad guys, because the bad guys are fulfilling a need, whether that is for shelter or food or some kind of thing. And so this is just not a problem that we can shoot or arrest our way out of. And there are real solutions for raising the negotiating power of victims, for creating less exploitative systems, and none of them happen at the end of a gun.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I will also say in the case of India in particular, there's actually a pernicious trend of like nonprofit rescue organizations, right, as they call them, which is, part of the problem, kidnapping women, taking them out of the brothel and forcing them to engage in textile labors at way lower wages. So you can call, prostitution, sexual slavery, but we can't solve that problem by forcing people into literal and worser slavery.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to bring that up about the actual effects of these raids by these rescue organizations. Operation Underground Railroad is just one of many rescue organizations that do this kind of thing. And so, I mean, I've heard of specific cases. I know in Thailand and I think Cambodia too, where they would these white boys from the United States would show up with their guns and their camo, and they would bust down the doors and they would basically find a whole house full of adult sex workers, and then they would hand these women over to the local authorities, who would then do exactly what you just said, put them in these reformatories, which were prisons, in which they were taught to be, good women or whatever. But
and we have a long history of criminalizing, promiscuity in this country, forcing women into Magdalene houses, lock hospitals, etc. And we really exported a lot of those policies in the aftermath of World War I and World War II. And a lot of the problems associated with prostitution are a direct result of criminalization, right? I think immigration is another good example, right? When you have people that can cross the border freely, there's less trouble than when you criminalize that and then you force people into the hands of smugglers. And the more effort and energy you put into making that harder, the further underground and the more vulnerable you push everyone involved. And so with sex work, pimps, for example, right? Pimps are associated with sex work. But before the criminalization of prostitution, which I know you know, but your audience might know, didn't happen until the 20th century, 1910, 1917. We shuttered the brothels in 1917. But when that happened, you took an economy out of the hands of overwhelmingly entrepreneurial women, and you forced sex workers to engage with men who were able to move more freely in public, right? It was men who were able to procure clients. It was men who were not being arrested for loitering or, looking promiscuous or whatever it was that we were doing. And so pimps are a creation of criminalization, not an inevitability. Yes.
Not just men, criminal. Very bad men, because
Correct.
that's who plays in a black market.
When you criminalize something, you create and encourage a lot of criminals. Yes,
because the nice guys won't do it. The nice guys won't play in that market. They won't operate in that market as business people. But really bad guys do.
Yes,
and that's why you have people like the cartels doing all those things to people.
Well, we know what prohibition does to markets, and it doesn't make them safer.
Right. All right, let's talk about this thing that makes me want to claw my eyes out daily. And I feel like even a lot of people who should know better do this conflation thing with the terms. And you know what I'm getting at here, this, trafficking versus prostitution or sex work. I don't even care what you use. And I've never known a sex worker who really cared about that. They just don't want to be called, they just don't care in general. But anyway, sex workers, some of them are more political. But anyway, what goes on with the great conflation here? How do people get away with this still of so easily merging the words trafficking and prostitution?
Well, part of it is that it's an unholy alliance between, conservative religious folks that have always been against all of the sex, right? Whether you're talking about pornography or premarital sex or prostitution, right? It's all in the same bucket of not allowed. And they've combined with the, moralists and more vocal element of feminist groups, right? That have decided that pornography or sex work is a symbol of women's exploitation. And so, you have folks like Gloria Steinem who have dedicated a huge chunk of their career trying to criminalize pornography and eradicate prostitution with these so-called end demand laws that they're pushing. I don't know if you know, but just last week, Maine became the first state in the US to officially adopt the Nordic model or end demand model, which is really dangerous. The theory behind the law is that all sex workers are victims and all clients are rapists. And so we should criminalize the buying and facilitating of sex work while not technically criminalizing selling sex work. They're going to make it as difficult as possible by surveilling, evicting, and otherwise harassing sex workers.
It's like so what it is maintaining that it's an evil. But of course, women can't be held accountable for doing evil.
Well, we can't consent with false consciousness, right? It's
exactly.
Yeah.
So, God, it makes me crazy how they and it starts with the cops, doesn't it? Basically,
part of the problem. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Part of the problem is that it's really difficult to combat a simple story with a more complex one, right? And so the simple story is that raping children is wrong. We should do everything in our power to stop that from happening. And the more complex story is all of the systemic issues that lead to the kinds of vulnerabilities that are exploited by predators, right? And it's hard to be against a system of coercive control. It's much better to have an enemy that you can have a mugshot, for example. But when you look at the sexual violence, or actually all of the violence that is done to sex workers, cops have always been our top predator, right? Whether you're talking about literally convicted serial killers and serial rapists, like what happened in Ohio just a few years ago when Donna Dalton was shot 8 times close range, or you're talking about, police officers that write NHI or no humans involved on cases where we go missing, allowing serial killers to proliferate. There is nobody who is more committed to ending violence and exploitation in the sex industry than sex workers themselves. And the solutions that we have been asking for over 100 years are very simple. But trying to operate as a member of a criminalized class only increases all of our vulnerabilities. It doesn't make us any safer.
You know, when I lay out all these arguments when I was teaching in colleges to my students, they would begin the discussion normally, meaning they'd assume that it should be illegal because, of course, it's just inherently degrading to women. And but within an hour, I mean, basically every kid in my class would always say, "I cannot believe this is illegal." It's just that they're treating
bananas.
adult women like this. But so, all right, Michael and I want to broaden this discussion a little bit, if you don't mind, and talk about politics too.
Foreign policy in particular.
Foreign policy?
Yeah.
Damn, man. Okay, let's do it. You want to work in Ukraine? I mean, that actually is quite relevant.
The
Yeah.
It is. But yeah.
Well, not just that, but the funding of this movie, a lot of it came from Carlos Slim, who's a big Hillary donor and a giant billionaire in Mexico.
Thank you. Yes.
And they're also getting a lot of funding and attention from the right.
Yeah. But the production of the film, it's being distributed by Fox, but the production of the film came from Carlos Slim. And Hillary Clinton.
Hold on. Wait. So you both understand. I mean, that's perfect. That makes perfect sense that it's a Hillary Clinton MAGA co-production essentially. Yes. Because on this one issue, they're behind it from the beginning. I want to talk about Hillary in a minute, but go ahead, Michael.
Oh, can you actually lay that out?
Oh, well, okay. So when Hillary was Secretary of State, she's the one who created the Office of something against human trafficking or whatever. So since she created within the State Department an entire division devoted to creating this propaganda, to putting out all this discourse around this stuff, and they're the ones who began the Great Conflation. That's when you see the beginning of people talking about trafficking. And if you do a Google search, you can see that the mentions of the word trafficking just spike all of a sudden right around 2000. Because the Bush people then took it up too and really amplified it.
This has always been a bipartisan issue. We get a lot of hate from the right and the left. Right.
It's kind of like, it's like the feminist left and liberals too, and the hard right, the Christian right, I would say. Yeah, they're the ones who are passionate about it. So go ahead.
Basically, I think a lot of this is an attempt to reignite the QAnon movement, like as a provocation from the left, and like even within the right itself, because basically I see the QAnon movement itself stemming from 2012 and Cambridge Analytica and the Obama administration gathering a ton of opposition research from Facebook about how conservative voters think and do. And then this is a total conspiracy theory, but this source Q that came out of nowhere that claimed to be an inside intelligence agent. What did Q end up doing? All he did was just distracted a bunch of MAGA voters into wasting their time and energy on this wild goose chase that ended up with them getting arrested on January 6th.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, but it did spawn a real movement. The QAnon movement is real. I know this for sure, better than almost anyone.
Updated version of the blood libel myth that's been haunting us for hundreds and hundreds of years. You know?
I mean, it's a very large number of people who really believe this stuff and are passionate about it and act on it, right? I mean,
but okay.
These are not new ideas, right? I mean, they've been repackaged, but
yes. Well, I mean, there's new elements to it, but it doesn't matter. I mean,
basically what I'm saying is that this activates the lizard brain of people who believe in that, and it puts them on a wild goose chase that puts their efforts away from something politically productive.
Yes, that's for sure. Although, well, that's the thing about this movie that is somewhat concerning to me, is that it seems like it might be politically productive because people are really talking about it. People are really sort of moving around it and doing things around it. And I could see it swaying some piece of the national electorate in some way or another that will not be pretty. You know, I could see more legislation coming down that looks like Sesta Fosta or even more draconian, or that has, more surveillance that's supposedly directed at sex workers or trafficking, but is really directed at everybody. That's what I think is going to happen.
Right. I mean, we're about to lose end-to-end encryption, right? Because we say that we are looking for traffickers, right? But we're not putting any energy to actually reducing exploitation or going after folks, right? We're trying to find people sexting one another, people's secrets. And this conflation, again, between adult consensual sex work and trafficking or violation, it results in a lot of panic response legislation that uses a hammer to erode all of our rights. That's why this issue is so important, and why it's so important as we move into the next phase of technology that we do something to eradicate this myth. But again, I think you're right. I think this movie is going to solidify this idea in a lot of people's minds. I am not optimistic about us letting go of the oldest stigma.
Oh my God!
But,
and it's go ahead, Michael.
The bad guys in this movie are Colombians, like Colombian warlords. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
Right.
They're not Jeffrey Epstein. They're not Barney Frank. They're not,
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, it seems like this is a good excuse to get more DHS funding to go into other parts of the world under the guise of stopping human trafficking.
Right.
That too. That's what the Hillary people get out of it. That's what the liberals get out of it. That's right. That's why they launched it. Mm-hmm. The Hillary people started it. And I mean the Hillary faction in the Democratic Party. The Republicans ran with it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's absolutely bipartisan, but it's those two particular wings. It's the MAGA Republicans mostly and the Hillary Clinton Democrats.
Sure. I mean, this is an old alliance, right?
Wild.
You're talking about scolds,
totally.
Whether you're talking about feminists or whether you're talking about, Christian conservatives that are trying to, outlaw masturbation. I mean, we've done a lot of dumb crusades over the years.
Right. It is ostensibly a campaign against child sex slavery, but it's really a campaign against sex work in toto. All of it.
It's really a campaign. Yes. I mean, it's really a campaign against freedom of movement and freedom of expression, period.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's part of my job to sort of think bigger, but this doesn't just apply to people in the sex industry, right? Sex workers have been, calling on this for years. We've been screaming at least since Sesta Fosta, but the apparatus that has been built to hunt us is and will continue to expand. So we justify a lot of horrible things in the name of protecting the most vulnerable. But again, we can't hunt or arrest or grenade our way out of any of these problems.
So here's what's going to happen almost for sure. If you know anything about Operation Underground Railroad, and we found out a lot about them very recently because of this investigation by the Utah Attorney General against them that lasted for several years, and he just abandoned it suddenly this year for no apparent reason.
Right.
But what we know from the reporting on that case, is that Operation Underground Railroad had for many years given hundreds of thousands, I think millions of dollars to law enforcement, I think county law enforcement in Utah, to conduct various operations against sex trafficking, which of course, in every case, all they found was a bunch of adults doing sex work consensually. So what you're going to see now that this movie has made tens of millions of dollars, that's going to Operation Underground Railroad, whatever the fuck it's called. We're going to see much more of this. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's going to be more money going from that organization to the cops.
Right.
Everyone. Okay. And this audience is not fond of cops in general. So, I mean, nor are a lot of people, but that's going to be the ultimate result of this. That's going to reduce freedom, not just for sex workers, but for everybody.
I mean, figures like Swanee Hunt, right, have been a part of this as well, of using their vast resources to encourage law enforcement to, arrest sex workers or do raids on massage parlors. And all of it's done in the name of reducing exploitation. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we have already created a machine, right, where the conflation of prostitution and trafficking creates all of these perverse incentives for law enforcement to focus on adult consensual sex workers who are infinitely easier to find, right, than victims of exploitation and violence. They make all these arrests. They, check off on their tally how many victims of sex trafficking they rescued, and they open up this source of funding, both from private sources, places like, Operation Underground Railroad, Swanee Hunt, and also the federal government is just as susceptible to this as anyone else. And it's a real problem. And it's led to, embarrassments like what happened with the Robert Kraft sting. But I think it's important for folks to understand what so-called anti-trafficking work looks like. And it's only expanding these systems that I think we should all be standing against.
Awesome. Totally. Thank you. Thank you. So where should we go to help Old Pros or any other organization?
Yeah, we do a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for at oldprosonline.org. You can also follow us across social media at Old Pros Online if you want to get more educated about this. We have a lot of resources available. I also host a podcast called The Oldest Profession, where every episode we do a deep dive on a different sex worker from history. And I think that the last episode that we released, which is about this protest that happened January 25th, 1917, is especially relevant given the relationship between what Reverend Paul Smith did in 1917 and what the creators of this film are doing today.
Wow. Awesome. Really awesome. I can't wait to see that. I don't know about that. That sounds phenomenal.
Oh yeah, it's a great story. Do we have a minute?
We have 30 seconds.
Great.
Less.
Yeah. Reverend Paul Smith said that he wanted to shut down the brothels to help women. Sex workers marched against him, saying that what they needed was higher wages and to not be arrested. They lost that fight. They shuttered the brothels, and Reverend Paul Smith used that to create a media career that led to the first religiously funded film on this issue. He, in many ways, funded and was an instigator around the white slave panic.
Wow.
Or at least a major beneficiary.
Amazing.
Didn't rescue a single person.
I didn't know about him. That's great. Wow. Yeah. Amazing. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for this. Really wonderful. And I think you educated a lot of people.
I really appreciate. Thank you so much for having me on the show and for giving this the time and attention that it deserves. Thanks.
You bet. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Bye.
So yeah, we're done here. We are now, Michael and I are going to go to Unregistered Live, which is our weekly Zoom hangout with patrons of Unregistered. And if you want to join us, it meets after every Unreported. Just go to patreon.com. Can you put the URL on the screen? Patreon.com/unregistered and join at any level. And you can just click the URL. It's in the comments there and join us. So thanks, man. This was awesome.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Get ready for the pitchforks.
Yeah, I know.
And torches. All right.
Peace.
Peace.